Good evening, members. Prayers this evening will be said by the Reverend Barry Knott.
Let us pray. Mighty God, hear our prayer and be in the midst of our meeting today. Thank you that your presence calms the troubled sea of life and speaks peace into our souls. Give us clear minds and peaceful hearts as we gather together. Loving God, thank you for every seat that has been filled here today, for each mind and heart that fills the presence of this room. We thank you. Only you truly know what we are setting out to accomplish today. We have an idea, a vision, an ambition. We have talents, abilities, and time to work, but only you can see the perfect detail at the end of every beginning, every project, every season, every challenge. As the events of the day continue to unfold, we seek your clarity and your peace. We know you are with us and for us as we gather together to seek your counsel. Come fully into our situation, both as a group and individually. Cover us with a blanket of honesty, patience, and unity. Solutions amongst differing personalities can seem impossible. Thankfully, we are not expected to be perfect. Thankfully, we know that we will and can fall short. So as we sit here today, let us release the bind of blame in exchange for harmony. Help us endure disagreement and strife with courage and love. Grant peace in knowing we are pursuing a just and integrated community. Lord God, help us to find joy in life. May peace in our hearts be there with grace of your words, love for our community. May it be in our hands, and the joy of the Christmas season be in our souls. May your love surround us, your spirit guide us, your voice cheer us, your peace calm us, and your wisdom help us. God, who shines light in our darkness, at this time of year we rejoice in your coming and find renewing strength as you dwell among us. May our lives tell stories of hope and of actions reflecting your light, of love and justice in our community. As the year turns, renew our vision for a world where every person may find their way to a place of trust and safety. Faithful Father, we thank you for hearing our prayers, feeding us with your love, and encouraging us as we gather together. Take our lives and use us to love and serve you and all the people in our borough. We are created by your power, redeemed by your love, and strengthened by your Spirit. We give ourselves into your service. May we love you and love others as we serve with all our heart. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Please be seated, everybody. Thank you, everybody. I have been advised that there is no fire drill this evening planned, but if the alarm does sound, Mrs. Snook at the end here will ascertain the situation and provide further instructions. These proceedings will be recorded by the council, but will anybody else be recorded or filming them? I ask so that the people at the meeting will know if this will be happening. So I take that as a no. Thank you. The photograph is already done. Right, I've received apologies for absences of councillors. Firma, what I thought was, all right. Delish, because I can't say his second name, but we all know him as Dennis, sorry. Right. Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Round, Councillor Wilby, Councillor Hasty, Councillor Bartlett, and did Lottie turn up? No. Councillor Parfait, Reid, and poor old Councillor Newton, but apparently he is getting better, but good, so, yeah. So there's quite a lot missing tonight. Are there any application for dispensation? No, anybody? Lovely, thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interests and other significant interests by members? No, thank you. Any disclosures by officers?
No, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? And I presume that everybody received a yes? Yes. Okay, thank you. Have you got that? Yeah. Yeah.
On which item?
Well, yeah, well, yeah, and the questions. And the questions. Yeah. Is it agreed that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed? Thank you. Are the minutes of the meeting of the Borough Council held on the 25th September 2019 agreed as the correct records? Agreed. Thank you. Mayor's announcements. As normal, been very busy, very pleasurable, met lots of lovely people. But I did meet one gentleman who really made me look up and take interest, and I promised him that I would speak to you all about it. I wanted to inform members of two significant events regarding the Royal West Kent Regiment, latterly known as the Queen Own Buffs, the Royal Kent Regiment. This year marked the 75th anniversary of the siege of Kohima. This was a turning point of the Japanese offences in India and one of the most significant battles of World War II. During the siege, men from 4th Battalion, the Royal West Kent Regiment, held off a much larger Japanese force for 15 days. During the course of the siege, nearly 200 men out of a total of 440 were killed or wounded. It is important that their sacrifice and service is remembered by us all here, and I would like to thank Mr. Steve Russell for meeting me to discuss this event. A very knowledgeable man. On Sunday the 15th September, it was my honour to attend the annual reunion of the Queen of Buffs at Drumhead Services in Brenchley Gardens. Sadly, the final reunion of the Queen of Buffs. As fewer and fewer veterans are alive to mark the event, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the people of Maidstone to thank those who served the regiment for their service and their sacrifice. I hope you all agree with that. Thank you. And I know Mr. Russell will be a very happy man. Thank you. I won't up procedures because it's a very busy evening. But what I will say, and it isn't on my script, I want to listen to everybody tonight. the councillors, the members of the public. I really do want to listen. But I can't if it's shouting. I can't if boards are waved in the air. Let's get open to saying what we wish and what is on our minds. Sometimes we can't always agree with that, and sometimes we can't make a change tonight, but it doesn't mean we're not listening. I just wanted to say that for everybody. So we've done all that.
Number 9 now.
Yeah, number 9. There are no petitions this evening. We have a lot of questions from members of the public this evening, so I would remind members that the question and answer session is limited to 1 hour. I received notification that Mr. Peter Coolin wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of Strategic Planning I know what he's saying, yeah, Infrastructure Committee. Thank you, Mr. Coolin.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And it is a question for Councillor David Burton, Chair of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee. During preparation of the adopted local plan, the then council leader reported that 21 constraints had been examined with a view to arriving at a lower target than the assessed housing need, and that none was found to bite. Which constraints do you expect to be effective in reducing the currently assessed needs figure, and by how much? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Burton, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Cooling, I think when we start talking about constraints and housing numbers, we should actually think about this in a logical sequence. We have a number of sites offered, and they all need to be examined and considered against every possible constraint that may apply. And you start with the possible and you wean it down with constraints, and this will derive the number that can be safely delivered. We don't start with an arbitrary number and think about constraints and how can we make the number go down. We look at the sites, we apply every single constraint, and there is the opportunity for mitigation of constraints, and then that leads us to the number. I think it's impossible at this stage to even indicate what that number will be it higher, lower, or the exact number that currently legislation asks us to look at. What I would like to say to you, though, is that very specifically, I do think that transport and highways will be one of the biggest considerations of limitation. And I'm really pleased to say that currently this council, this authority, is working extremely closely with Kent County Council, the Highways Authority, in commissioning a Maidstone transport model that will give us a very sensible oversight and allow us to detect where the most difficult places are and where it is possible to deliver sensible homes.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I would also like to ask now if there any group leader or representative present would also like to respond to Mr. Coolin. No, thank you. Mr. Coolin, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the Chairman of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee arising out of your original question or the reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I would.
Go ahead.
Councillor Burton, that was a very encouraging response. Thank you very much. It is a leading question. If at the end of reviewing all of the 335 or whatever it is sites, you have applied constraints and knocked out a lot so that you get below the assessed housing needs figure, will you advise Maidstone Borough Council to stand up and defend a lower number than the assessed housing need? Thank you.
Councillor Burton.
Two parts to that, and I don't want to steal thunder that may be yet to come. There is a standardised methodology which government is to instruct us. There are certainly elements of that that to many may not seem sensible, and that perhaps is a matter to be challenged in its own right. But putting that to one side, our local plan should deliver what this council believes can actually be done with the appropriate infrastructure in collaboration with all of our partners in the best manner to ensure the best quality of life for the residents of our borough. And the number will be the number that our process deems that to be it higher, lower or exact, but we're too early to say what it's going to be.
Right, I would now like to ask if any group leader or representative present would also like to respond to Mr. Curling. Councillor Cox.
Can I just say, Mr. Cooling, I wholeheartedly endorse what Councillor Burton has said. He's going exactly with fact, and that is no more or no less that we can say at the moment, but I wholly endorse what he said and support him.
Thank you, Mr. Curling, for your questions. I have received notification that Mr. Peter Titchener wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of Planning Committee. Go.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, members. My question, as the Mayor said, is to Councillor English, Chair of the Planning Committee. Do you accept that failure to completely mitigate the adverse impact on air quality is a valid reason to refuse a planning application?
Councillor English, would you like to reply?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Titchener, for your question. Clearly, the issues of surrounding air quality, good or bad, are a material planning consideration. Equally clearly, it is always the case that if a material consideration cannot be mitigated, then that would be grounds for a refusal of a planning application. Having said that, the whole thrust of planning legislation since 1936 has been to enable development and to try and secure mitigation. So it is always going to be a fairly high threshold to say there is no mitigation possible. But it does happen, and clearly to enable the council to correctly judge and make these decisions, we need the correct policy background. We have made some progress in the current local plan, but Councillor Burton, from his point of view, and strategic planning, and myself, and other members of this council across party, are looking in this review of the local plan to build on that work, if that's not an unintentional negative in this context, to actually ensure that the policy background is more robust. In between those two processes, we have taken on board technical guidance to help us to assess air quality issues, and that has enabled us to be more precise to see whether mitigation is needed, can be provided, or where it can't be provided, to actually say, no, this is an unacceptable application. But as I say, Councillor Titchener, it is a high threshold to say whether it's air quality or anything else that it is not possible to mitigate. And we have to have a clear and robust evidence base in order to support that.
Thank you, Councillor English. Before I ask any more, is there any group leader or representative present who would also like to respond to Mr Titchener? Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to build a little bit on what Councillor English correctly said. I think what we'd like to do is seek to establish this as actual policy as part of our local plan review. And I think that would take it a step further, and I think that would be extremely hands. As Councillor English rightly said, this has been a cross-party issue, but I think we'd all work together to establish this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Anyone else? No? Oh, sorry. Mackay, thank you. Sorry, Malcolm.
Thank you for attending. On behalf of the Labour Group, we would support what Councillor English has said and Councillor Perry. Air quality is increasingly becoming an important issue, I think, and recognise that we must improve our policies to improve the air quality in Maidstone. So I fully support what Councillor English says and Councillor Perry, and I hope we get better air quality in Maidstone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'd just like to ask one quick question. I hear what Councillor English says and understand mitigation is, it's not a black and white situation always. But the question I want to ask, it is encouraging what he said, but are you satisfied that you have the means to fully assess the impact on air quality before the housing developments are built?
Councillor English.
Very interesting question. I would, at the risk of sounding indecisive, I would say yes and no. From a technical point of view, I think we have the abilities in the Council's teams to make the right assessment. What I would say is that our policy background is not as robust yet as we want it to be in order to have the relevant sets of benchmarks to assess against. We are across party, starting from the work that came from the Low Emissions Working Group and from work done in Strategic Planning Committee, as it was then called, and in other parts of Council, and in work also being done in the Biodiversity Working Group. We are going to have, hopefully, in the local plan review, much more robust policy measures in place and benchmarks which we can assess against. So I would say this is a work in progress, helped by the fact that the national climate is far more receptive to having controls in this area than it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Thank you. Are there anyone else of group leaders or representatives present who would also like to reply to Mr Titchener? Councillor Perry?
I'd like to defer to my colleague, Councillor Burton, to reply. Thank you.
Rather to reiterate some of what's already been said, but very specifically, the technical planning guidance that we adopted, because that was the most powerful way we could move forwards quickly, and that we intend to put into policy, actually offers a methodology for calculating exactly what you refer to. But the other thing I'd like to make sure that everybody is fully aware of is that this time around with local plan, the traffic modelling that will be conducted will have a direct overlay modelling air quality issues. That wasn't done last time. I think it is the crux of the issues. It's not the only source of air quality issues. Traffic is not the only source, but it's highly significant, and it's one of those that we can actually, once we're informed and evidenced, we can actually mitigate or, as appropriate, refuse further development.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Titchener, for your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
I've received bless you. I have received notification that Ms. Cheryl Taylor Maggio wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of the Policy and Resource Committee.
I'm afraid that she's obviously not enjoying
Yes.
the commute back from London.
Oh.
If you wish me to ask her, please do. I understand that may not be possible. Your boss.
No, I'm ever so sorry. We're sorry, we're more than happy. We are more than happy to send a written reply. Thank you. So we move on. I've received notification that Mr. Gary Thomas wishes to ask questions of the Chairman of Strategic Planning Infrastructure Committee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. According to the local press, 334 sites were offered as a result of the call for sites, with a suspected capacity of about 60,000 dwellings, which is way above any target that either the government or whatever will aim for. Residents affected by these candidate sites, and I think that's particularly true of rural sites, wishing to move, are blighted. As the sustainability analysis for all this number of sites is going to take quite a time, many months. Is it not possible and reasonable to declare almost immediately or as soon as possible larger sites particularly that clearly fail any reasonable test of sustainability?
Are you quite happy to answer that question? Thank you, Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Right, hopefully this time. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Thomas. Direct answer, no. We cannot just immediately dismiss this site over that site because we have to do it in an evidenced manner. And without repeating myself too many times, I think the highways modelling will be one of the most significant pieces of that. And I promise you that I and my colleagues are pushing that this is done as quickly and as expediently as possible so that we can move to the stage of dismissal that you ask. I am particularly keen that we move very, very quickly, not to be reckless. I have to be honest with you and say my overarching concern is that our current plan is time limited. It has an expiry date. And if we don't get something in place to succeed it, we're open to the presumption in favour. So I can promise you that for all of the right reasons, every due haste possible is being made so that we can deliver certainty as quickly as possible. And much as I'd love to say, well, let's redline an obvious 6 straight away, simply can't do that. But as soon as we can, I promise you we will.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Mr. Thomas. Oh, no, sorry. Are there any other councillors or representatives would like to? Hi, Eddie. Councillor Powell, then Councillor Perry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. I think the correct answer is yes. And the reason why, there's all sorts of land that can be submitted through a call for sites. Some of this land has been turned down many, many times before, and whilst that's not a consideration for turning it down this time, it can be blatantly obvious on day one that is just a speculative forwarding, which the people can do. But this council made a promise that the first review of those pieces of land would be done this coming February. I don't know what the answer is from around this chamber. I don't think you're going to get that answer this February. But what it is doing, in the meantime, is if a person wants to put up their property for sale or blighted, as you kind of rightly said, it puts them in a position of disadvantage because people moving into that property don't know whether there's going to be 700 houses at the bottom of their garden or what's going to happen across the road or what's going to happen to anything. So I think the question you've asked tonight is absolutely right, and thank you very much for raising it.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I just wanted to build on the point that Councillor Burton has made. I understand where Councillor Powell is coming from, I perfectly do, and I think probably a lot of us do. But the reality is, as Councillor Burton very clearly put it, we have to be evidence-based. We can't move any other way. However, I did want to say this. We are working very, very closely with KCC, more than I think we did in previous years. And I think this is a very... We've set up what I would call a strategic... It's a very popular word, strategic, but strategic infrastructure working group, and it's jointly manned by KCC and NBC, plus our various officers. I think it's a very important group. It's meeting to discuss these very issues, particularly the sort of constraints that have been raised, and I think hopefully we can have a much more coordinated approach to this. And it is a very serious issue, and so I think we all recognise that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Mr Thomas, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the Chairman of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee arising out of your original question or reply?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that the point why this has arisen is that there are 334 sites put forward, according to the KM. I haven't counted them. Now, that is an extraordinary number, far above what is required, and it does blight areas of the countryside.
I'm so sorry, Mr Thomas. I really do need you to ask a question.
Oh, all right.
Not a statement. Thank you.
It's difficult to answer a question because the answer is that I don't happen to agree with Councillor Burton's response, but much more with Councillor Powell. So I hope that there will be some consideration given to it. Thank you.
Okay, Mr Thomas, thank you so much. We now move on. I've received notification that Mr John Hughes wishes to ask a question to the Chairman of Economics, Regeneration and Leisure Committee. Before you start, can I just have, when we ask a question and the next person, all I'm hearing is mumbling. So if I'm hearing mumbling, so is our guests. So, Mr Hughes, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening. My question is for Councillor Paul Harper, Chairman of the Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee. And the question is this. We understand that consideration of employment comes within the remit of your committee. How will you ensure that employment decisions will be fully aligned with housing and infrastructure decisions, particularly transport, in relation to the local plan review strategy and impact on the borough's residents?
Councillor Harper.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank you for the question, and when you say my committee, I only wish it was, but it's everybody's committee here. All 7 of us on that committee work together. Yes, we are looking very seriously into economic regeneration, and very shortly the officers will be commissioning a new survey and leading up to new policies in terms of how we take our economy forward. And clearly, as part of the local plan review, there will be various economic development assessment needs undertaken, which include retail and so on, which will feed directly into the local plan review over the next few months. and it's going to be one of the important areas for this committee, for economic regeneration and leisure, to actually make sure that when we look at employment land and topics related to employment, we do all we can do to protect our current employment land, both in the town but also in the rural areas. Because picking up your point on transport, one of the things I'm very clear on, and I think my colleagues on the committee are, is that we want to see jobs provided around the borough. So we don't just want, to provide the jobs in the future in the town centre. They have to be distributed across the borough in close relationship to where people live, to reduce the amount of travel people have to do from home to work. And speaking as a person who lives obviously in Maidstone, but I've worked in London since more or less since I moved to Maidstone, I think the challenge to us as a council is to ensure that in future people who live in Maidstone can find work in Maidstone. If we're going to provide currently, well, potentially anything up to an additional 10,000 houses, our challenge has to be, on top of the current targets, to find another 10,000 jobs and work with employers and work with communities to identify how we can regenerate our economy. Because if we don't, Maidstone will die as a town and as a rural area. We will just become a commuting area. Shops will wither away, community facilities will die as people only see this as a bed to sleep in, and then they get on the train and they head out of the borough. So I think our challenge is really important, and it's, as I say, important to ensure that we create full-time and part-time jobs to suit the future population, and skilled and unskilled jobs, a whole mixture to enable everybody in the future in this borough to find jobs locally and not end up having to commute to London, as myself and I know a number of colleagues here have to on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Is there anybody else, leader or representative, wish to answer Mr. Hughes' question? Councillor Perry?
I would like to defer to Councillor Bagman, please.
Oh, right.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to correct Councillor Harper on one thing. I thought there were 9 members of the committee, not 7. But if there are 7, then that's fine. But I'm sure last time I went, there were 9. So it's not just 7, it's not just 9 of us. To be honest with you, Mr. Hughes, any member of this council can put an agenda item onto any agenda for any committee. So it's not about who the chairman is, it's not about who the vice chairman is, who happens to be me, for economic regeneration and leisure. It can be any member of this chamber. So if you want to lobby someone to have an agenda item, please do so. You've raised an interesting topic because, as Councillor Harper has said, we are in the process of re-evaluating the current economic development strategy, which expires or is due to expire naturally, if that's possible, in July of next year. It had a 5-year lifespan. We were in a very different place 5 years ago, and the economic development strategy was the first one this council had ever had, and it took quite a long time for people to like it. There is no doubt about it, with the housing numbers we're looking at, frankly, we don't have enough jobs. We will be a dormitory town. It's not a we want to be something else. We will be a dormitory town unless we take positive action. Problem with taking positive action is we have to identify areas which will provide easy roads in, easy roads out, and or methods of transport for people who work there. I'm not a commuter to London. I'm fortunate in that I have found a job locally. Others are not so fortunate. And we're in a position where we as a council should be looking at a cross-section. We've got the medical campus up the road. Now, there's no doubt about it, that is bringing in some highly skilled individuals, but it is quite narrow. We've got other incubator units over at Parkwood for start-up businesses. Great. But a lot of those people then need to move on to other areas as their businesses grow. So I think as a council, we have to take responsibility for this. And I know everyone in this room will be really unhappy, but that does mean some sort of land grab. It has to. So I think we're building the wrong kind of houses in the borough, but we won't go into that. I think we've got far too many executive houses. Personally, I think we need more smaller homes for smaller units, whether that's your singletons, your just marrieds with one child, but also with a range of jobs so people can actually make that progression. So they start out at the lower paid, but they have the progression, and they can make that progression in the borough and stay in the borough. So that's the economic development strategy. I don't think there are enough employment sites within those that have come forward. There's a few, but it's just not enough. We do need more. There's a site down in my neck of the woods, down in Yalding, that was a former site for an industrial company. I won't name names because other companies are available. But there are some quite ambitious plans for that area. Now, that is not a million miles from the M25. And I think it's absolutely crucial that wherever we look at these employment sites, they are really good for connections. So whether that's rail, bus, road, you've got to get your guys in and your girls in, and you've got to get them back home again. So I think that's where we ought to be focusing our targets. And I say, I feel we don't have enough employment sites, but really, why would anybody want to move into the area if they don't have a job here? You know, you only have to look at places like the 229 daily. At certain times of the day, it's gridlocked as people are trying to get from Medway to Maidstone or Maidstone to Medway, whether they're commuting to work or they're commuting home. I mean, it's crazy. The more jobs we can create here and keep our residents here and spending their money here, that's how we become a prosperous borough. And personally, I think that's what I would want, and I bet you anything 55 people who are elected councillors also want that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Was there anybody else that would wish to speak? Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'm going to do something, we didn't have the question earlier, but I think it has relevance and the information that I have. When we're talking about employment and being able to move around the borough, transport, we have things in place. The local growth fund monies were secured from the South East local enterprise to fund a programme of junction improvements to mitigate the historical traffic management issues and additional development to the current local plan. Excuse me. Whilst programmes such as these are complex to deliver, the understanding is the public consultation by Kent County Council will commence early in the new year, and funding from the LEP has also been significant.
Councillor Cox.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's about employment and transport.
What I've been informed is a different question.
But he can say whatever he likes.
Okay, carry on, so's the Chief Exec.
Another example is the highway improvements outside the Kent Medical Campus, which are accelerated by a successful bid from the National Infrastructure Productivity Fund, where we've secured 9 million and including £500,000 from the Borough Council. This will fund improvements to nearby roads and roundabouts and will include the dualling of the road between them. Maidstone Council with Kent County Council have also made a housing infrastructure bid in respect of our joint land holdings for the Royal Mail sorting office at Maidstone and Maidstone East Station. Whilst this bid was unsuccessful, we will instead be referred to Homes England to make a bid for their smaller sites fund, which will unlock this type of development. Furthermore, the council has 2 mixed tenure housing development sites within Maidstone, and the Ministry of Housing and Communities has also supported this. And lastly, our local enterprise money has enabled us to get funding for the Maidstone East ticket office, which will improve the station, and also, when Thameslink eventually does get down to us, will facilitate this much better and enable people to move around the borough and indeed towards London to get to the jobs. But as we've already heard, the medical campus is supplying or attracting inward investment, and that is what the economic development team, which is under the chairmanship of Paul Harper, has been looking at, will continue to look at, and it will be high on our agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Anybody else? No. Councillor Mackay?
Can I make a quick point here that in the call for sites, there are a call for sites for industrial, but employment is not solely industrial. There is a lot of employment in the arts, in culture and in leisure. So that doesn't require acres and acres of fields. But I take your point. They must go hand, employment and housing must go hand in hand.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Mr Hughes, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the chairman of the Economics, Regeneration and Leisure Committee arising out of your original question or the replies?
Yes, please, Madam Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Can I begin by thanking the people who spoke for their very helpful responses? I think in many residents' view, the current situation in Maidstone is not sustainable for the long term.
Yep.
So doesn't that mean that we need a long-term sustainable plan for Maidstone for 20 or 25 years? And doesn't that require the integration of employment and housing and community services and transport? And that requires the Borough Council to have a mechanism to for the committees to communicate with each other in order to achieve that. And I look at and I am concerned that when I look at the remits of the committees, I find that more than one committee has employment, in this case, in its remit. And all I'm talking about is them communicating with each other.
Councillor Harper would like to answer.
Yeah, well, I can assure you that on Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee, when we look at any issues which we think other committees need to consider, that we obviously refer them on to, and vice versa. Whilst the councils are set up in a number of service committees, we have our cross-cutting strategic plan, and all committees work together in terms of corporate objectives. So in terms of the local plan, I imagine that all the different committees of the council, so communities, housing and environment, economic regeneration and leisure, and obviously strategic planning, will all be looking at various elements of it and feeding back to strategic planning. So ultimately, at the end of this review process, they will bring, if you like, a composite document which will have to be approved by the full council, because it's full council which will approve or not the ultimate local plan refresh. But to pick up on your points also in terms of your concerns about integration, I think that's got to be one of the main things we're going to be looking at. One of the opportunities, we had a briefing only in this room yesterday by the officers over the 5 town centre areas of opportunity, and we had a discussion leading on from that in terms of how those sites not only can provide housing but can provide jobs in the future on those major sites around the town centre. And as Councillor Mackay said earlier, economic regeneration is a part of the work to be undertaken by our consultants, can include areas such as arts, culture and leisure. And we only have to look at other towns in Kent, such as Maidstone, look at cities like Liverpool, where they've had massive regeneration through those sectors, which don't necessarily require any form of industrial development, and potentially with our town centre. And as the economy changes, so as retail will decline and we move more to online shopping, we have empty shop units in the town centre, not only in Maidstone, but obviously ultimately in some of our rural areas as well. There may well be opportunities working with landlords to look at how you may use those units for different uses. So perhaps around culture and leisure and so on, and other ways you can look at regenerating your economy. We have the benefit here of Maidstone Studios, which obviously was on the national TV only a couple of weeks ago, as a major incubator and a major resource in terms of arts-based education and learning. We've got the University for Creative Arts adjacent to us in Rochester. So that's an area, for instance, where we could look at relatively unintrusive economic regeneration, but it could actually be used to pump money into our local economy. And our museum project, which we've just embarked on, which if we get the funding, would be £5 million invested in Maidstone to upgrade the museum, which will create a lot of jobs through the building process and subsequently. So it is more than possible to integrate all these areas of work moving forward.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to answer or reply? Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On your... thank you, Mr Hughes. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your question. Can I just reassure you on your point about committees talking to each other? It's so easy to imagine us all being in our own silos, just doing our own decision-making. Not at all. Operationally, we have our own internal way of working, whereby we, when I say we, I mean the chairman and the vice chairman of each committee. We get together quarterly with officer support and we check through each other's work programmes so that we all know what's going on. And if we feel that, oh, are we not sure which committee that should go to, we actually talk it through. So there is that communication, but it's a very important point that you've brought up. Thank you for raising it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for raising this. It's a very interesting point. We have a committee system, and this is one of the problems, one of the issues of a committee system is, do they get into silos, do they talk to each other? And I'm reminded when I was working for the Foreign Office that we used to say that a camel is a horse designed by a committee, and certainly I think that is true. I think on behalf of my group, we actually prefer a cabinet system where you can actually action quickly and make the decisions. And so I just would like to make that point. Thank you, Chair. Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Thank you, Mr Hughes. I have received notification that Mr Steve Healy wishes to ask the question of Chairman of the Policy and Resource Committee. Would you like to come forward, Mr Healy?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to the Chairman of the Policy and Resources Committee. On the 22nd of May 2019, you chose to place item 10, paper call for sites, into part 2 of the meeting, i.e. away from public scrutiny. This was based on advice from officers that non-disclosure agreements had been signed with some landowners impacted by sites in the report. It is believed that at this meeting the committee took the decision to proceed with land east of Lenham as a preferred site for a potential new garden town, 5,000 new homes on a site covering around 900 acres of predominantly greenfield land. To reach this decision, we believe members of the Policy and Resources Committee were provided with a supplementary background report, updating them on officer investigations as part of a borough-wide analysis of possible locations for this new garden town. This analysis apparently considered the various opportunities and constraints of each of the sites to include environmental landscape, infrastructure, heritage and topography considerations. Could I ask whether this report, or when this report was circulated to the committee's members so that they had sufficient time to read the report and reflect on it in advance of taking that decision on the 22nd of May, and also ask why this report cannot be made publicly available for scrutiny and transparency?
Well done. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr Healy. In December 2018, the Council adopted a new strategic plan. One of the priorities agreed was that the Council would embrace growth and enable infrastructure, that Maidstone Council would play a proactive role in this. Officers therefore had the authority to develop recommendations as to how this would be achieved. The initial advice on this topic was reported to Policy and Resources on the 22nd of May 2019. I can confirm that the background report was referred to in the officers' report, which contained details of the assessment of alternative garden community locations. The findings were summarised in the officers' report. The Freedom of Information team have responded to the request for the report to be made public, but the information was withheld under section 43, brackets 2, hate doing that, sorry, of the Freedom of Information Act, as it is commercially sensitive.
Sorry, are there any other leaders or representatives wishing to talk? Councillor Perry. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I do understand the position that Councillor Cox has said. However, there's always a however. I always think the default position should always be maximum transparency. I always believe that. And I think if you go against that, then I think you get yourself into trouble. And I do appreciate your question, because I think it is a very, very good one. There can be sensitive issues here, and we do have to recognise that, always have to recognise that. But we should not use that as an excuse to retain information that should be in the public domain. We are public servants after all, and you fund us through your council tax. So I think really all I'm really saying here is that our default position, I've said, should always be maximum transparency. There were some sensitive issues here, and I think I fully understand that, but it should be the minimum. As far as possible, we should always be transparent. That's what I personally would like to see. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your question. And by the way, can I take the opportunity to say that it's really quite nice to have so many questions tonight. Recently, we haven't had the opportunity. Could you space them out a bit throughout the year, though? Yeah? But, well, if we did wish to hide the facts and keep it from public scrutiny, we didn't do a very good job, did we? Yeah, clearly. And you clearly know more than what you're alluding to in your question. But we should, probably because we're not very good at keeping it secret, avoid using yellow papers. But there are times when, quite frankly, one has to. When it comes down to how much you want to pay for something or willing to do. These must be kept confidential. They are of very sensitive commercial interest. But where we can release the information, I think we should. And I think in this area, the council is unusually got two hats on. And this has made life difficult. And talk of Chinese walls, etc. But what I will say is that the development you're referring to is a proposal, and it is one that will be considered alongside other proposals by strategic planning and infrastructure. There are 3, I think, similar schemes being proposed in other parts of the town. So this is not a fait accompli, yeah? But because the lead master planner was Maidstone Borough Council, it had to come before the Policy and Resources Committee. The other proposals came before a board of directors. And you don't know what was discussed there either, do you? And you wouldn't expect to know. So, I agree that we should keep an absolute minimum to information that should be excluded from public. But inevitably, some will have to be. But just remember, this proposal is a proposal. And it will be considered alongside other proposed sites. It's been made perfectly clear before. There are 60,000, enough land for 60,000 houses. A maximum number we will require will be 10. So the vast majority of these sites will be excluded from our revised local plan. But thank you very much for putting the question. And like I said, spread them out a bit in future, please.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Healy, for your question. And again, you made some excellent comments in there. And I actually agree with Councillor Perry. But one thing that I would say is that somebody in the council does believe in transparency, because this is the worst kept secret that I've ever seen since I've been on here. So it's, I think the communication, the understanding, I think as a council, I think we can learn from this. And that is, when you go into a room, you get sensitive information, you keep your mouth shut. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Just to the point. Anybody else, please? Right, I would like to ask now then that Mr. Ely, do you wish to ask a supplementary question to the Chairman of the Policy Resource Committee arising out of your original question or the reply?
Yes, I do, Madam Mayor. I think really this is an issue of trust and trust from your residents in the work that you do here in this council. Looking at your council's communication and engagement strategy, you say that you ensure that there's a clear opportunity for residents and partners to have an influence on decision making. Do you believe, Chairman of the Policy and Resources Committee, that the commercial interests of the council and the developers that you're working with, if you are, outweigh the public interest in making that information available?
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to give Councillor Cox a chance to reply.
If I could just quickly finish the question.
Oh, sorry.
The point is that residents need to be able to hold everybody in this chamber as elected members to account.
Thank you very much. Words like transparency and honesty have been used today. What I think we must understand is this is not the council's land. These are independent people who own this land, and we have not bought any land from them. It is their land to do with what they wish. That is why at that point, and up till the near future, it is under a confidentiality agreement that it was signed between the borough and those landowners. And as has been alluded to, if this was a business, a developer company, those decisions would have been made without any knowledge at all. But we only wish to be the master planners here to achieve things, and there are 6 other sites that are in the garden community classification. They will all go before the same scrutiny, whether it's one of 2,000 houses, 5, or however many are presented to those that put them through the scrutiny, the RAG scrutiny that this will take. And Those decisions will then enable us to put them before the SPY committee, and then that's where the public can have their say, because things may not have been considered that the public therefore know about. But it's at that stage. This is a process that happens all over the country. Every 5 years, the government make us go through this process. It costs us £1 million to do it. So we've got to do it right, so that we do get it right. We are held to account. If we did it wrong, we would be accountable to you. This has a process. It has to follow that process. And we can't leapfrog. We can't let things go unturned. And at this point, it was financially sensitive. Not necessarily for us. I think we were looking after the individuals that own the land, the 600-odd acres, not 900.
Please let Councillor Cox finish.
I hope that answers your supplementary question, but I do think we have to be careful about everybody's consideration, not just ours or the general public's. Here it was to do with the landowners.
Thank you. Any other councillor that wishes to ask any questions, please? Lest we move on. Thank you very much for your questions. We have received notification that Mr. Richard Proctor wishes to ask questions. Let me turn my page. Sorry. Yes, I wouldn't have asked the gentleman to come forward if I wished to cut him off in mid-air. To ask the chairman of the Policy and Resource Committee. Please ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the 18th of September 2019, the Policy and Resources Committee considered a paper titled Council-Led Garden Community, which proposed Lenham Heath as the Council's preferred location for further investigative work to build a new garden town of 5,000 new homes on a site covering roughly 900 acres of predominantly greenfield land. The committee resolved to issue a media statement immediately after the meeting to make this location public. Can the chairman of the Policy and Resources Committee comment on why he thought releasing this information to the media was the best course of action without first informing the residents of Lenham Heath, who have subsequently become blighted, and why this council has not directly communicated to affected residents, either in writing or convened a public meeting in the preceding 92 days since taking this decision?
Councillor Cox, please.
Thank you very much. It was felt that the media statement was the most appropriate means of notifying the public and stakeholders of the Policy and Resources Committee's decision to continue to pursue the proposal for a council-led garden community. The statement was also placed on the council website the following day too. Soon after the decision, the lead officer met with the chair and vice chair of the Lenham Parish Council and the 2 ward councillors, I believe on the 26th of September, to provide them with more background information. A community briefing was intended for November but had to be deferred because of the general election and has now been scheduled for the 24th of January, in consultation with the Parish Council. A further meeting with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Parish Council and 2 ward councillors will in fact take place tomorrow. Furthermore, the Council website contains a microsite for the proposal, which includes a vision document and frequently asked questions and responses. If the proposal is supported through the local plan review, it will in due course be considered by the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee. Against alternatives, and if supported, be subject to a public consultation at what we call Regulation 18B stage of the review process, which will most likely be in the autumn of 2020.
Are there any other leaders or represented? Councillor Mackay.
Yeah? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Mackay, we've gone over our time, so I've got to sort it out so we can carry on. Just 1 minute. Likely to go over to time that we wanted for this. So is everybody quite happy if we carry on and answer this gentleman's questions? Thank you. Councillor Mackay, would you go carry on, please?
Well, I'll take a deep breath. I don't have to rush now. So it almost seems like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. We released the information, and now you're asking us, should you have released the information? And you say, affected residents. Now, again, I'll come back to the point. This was a preferred location for further investigation. It wasn't, definitely going to happen. And how far do we go in affected residents? It's not just those in Lenham and Harwich. It's in Charing, it's in Bearsted, it's in Maidstone Town Centre, it's in Ashford. I mean, you're going to write all these people an individual letter. A press release going out at the same time to everyone was deemed the most economical, sensible and fair. And it was released, I think, as soon as it could do. Now, I understand where you're coming from, but we can't have it both ways. You keep things secret, well, why'd you let, and in this case, why'd you let everybody know? So, thank you for coming along. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Powell, please.
Thank you, Mr Proctor, for your question. And I must say that I totally disagree with both the leader of the committee and also my colleague behind. We've been talking about transparency tonight. We've also been looking at 6 garden villages, towns. I'd hate to use the word city. Yeah. And every single one of those places was going to get equal treatment beforehand. So all the tests were going to be exactly the same for every single one. Then afterwards, we would decide as a council through whatever committee which one we was going to go ahead with. Now, when we look at transparency and we look at honesty, and then we look at the word preferred location, let's forget what comes after it, it's preferred location, the two are mixed up. And this is what happens with people, with local communities. They get mixed up, they're getting mixed messages, and that's when the dissent starts. We have got to get our message right on day one and stick to that message.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Is there anybody else? No. So, Mr Proctor, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the Chairman of the Policy Resource Committee arising out of your original question or reply?
If I could.
You're
Thank you. A number of residents in Lenham Heath are worried and upset following numerous approaches by agents purporting to act on behalf of this council, frightening them into considering the sale of their land with the threat of compulsory purchase. Is this a moral, ethical and acceptable approach from a local authority?
right. As leader of the council, I'm sure Councillor Cox would like to stand up and answer that.
What you describe is obviously not moral. I hadn't been aware before you pointing this out, that there are people going door to door knocking on people, offering them cash for their houses. No, it's not good. I don't really see what we can do necessarily as a council to tell people we are not trying to buy your land, the council aren't. So don't answer the door to people knocking and saying that you should sell your land at any point until decisions have been made in whatever format they may be. No, I'm not going to turn up and say it's a scrupulous way of doing business. Of course not. But what I will say is, obviously, we don't want anybody to lose out in this process. The people that we've been dealing with, in other words, the landowners, they at any point could turn around and say, we're not going to go there. And that would be the end of the process. So I can't really say any more other than, of course, people should not be answering their doors and doing deals, certainly about the council. We have not instructed anybody to buy any land or do anything of the such.
Councillor Harper.
Well, Councillor Cox said it at the end. I think Maidstone Council would not do anything underhand. I think I'm speaking on behalf of all councillors here and our officers. We always act in the best interest of the public, and we do everything above board. There'd be no way anyone from this authority or employed by this authority would be instructed to do what you're saying. And what I suggest you and your neighbours do is to contact Kent County Council's trading standards and possibly the police, because it sounds to me like you're suffering from a case of fraud and impersonation by unscrupulous people, and they should be reported to the relevant authorities to take action on them.
Is there anybody else? No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your question. The gentleman at the door, do you wish to enter? No, it's members of the public. Oh, sorry. Trying to be nice. Now Councillor English is leaving. No, I know you are. Thank you very much. Right. Questions from the council members. Welcome, Councillor Garland. You're getting earlier and earlier. Behave. Go on, Councillor Garland. Have you got anything to declare, or have you been lobbied?
Neither.
Thank you very much. Again, Councillor Garton wishes to ask questions of the Chairman of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee.
Mr Chairman, the proposed Highways England scheme for remodelling Stockbury roundabout at Motorway 2 Junction 5 will effectively cut the village of Stockbury in two parts with no transport link between two sections of the village. Maidstone Borough Council initially filed an objection in its role as statutory objector. However, on 16th of October, the head of planning took, quite rightly, the decision to withdraw its objection under delegated powers under Part 2, Section 2.3.10, paragraph 93 of the Constitution, as he's entitled to do so. Could the Chair of Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee please advise the Chamber why the Head of Planning took this step, which will have such detrimental effects on the village of Stockbury, and why he did not consult with a ward member before taking this step?
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Would you like to respond?
Madam Mayor, yes, I shall respond. Thank you, Councillor Garton. Quite frankly, I find this really difficult to answer. How can I answer for another man's decision made under delegated authority which didn't come directly before my committee? Really difficult. I am reliably informed that the rationale behind the delegated decision was that balancing the local concerns against the compelling strategic benefits, the decision to withdraw the objection was made. And I'm also informed, and I think this is regrettable, that there is no requirement to consult ward members. Regrettably, I think it's something to do with designing camels by committee, or designing horses that look like camels by committee. And actually, if we had a cabinet system, you could hold someone to account, you could challenge the decision. There is no mechanism to call in or refer an officer decision. So it sits upon us all in this chamber that actually granted the scheme of delegation that makes this possible. So that's the best answer I can give, and I apologise for it being the case.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Garden, do you have a supplementary to a question to ask of the Chairman of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Chairman for his frank answers and helpful answers, although they're not satisfactory, of course, to the people of Stockbury, which are suffering severe implications also on the borough's strategic plan. May I ask the Chairman to consider a member item to be added to the next possible agenda of his committee to discuss this issue?
No, I can't. Councillor Burton.
Of course, Madam Mayor, if there is a request for a member item at the next SPY committee, then the Vice Chair and myself will, of course, give it consideration to see what can be done.
Thank you. We now move on to item 12, current issues. I call upon the Leader of the Council to submit his report on current issues. Councillor Clott, you may speak for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't cover some of the topics that have already been spoken about in the Chamber this evening, but after my last Leaders' report in September, I left you all potentially hanging. Results from our housing awards. 3 projects within Maidstone Borough Council housing and economic development teams did indeed win housing awards, along with the highly commended for the team member and of the Kent Housing Group Excellence Awards. Home Finder project and the work on Len House have won the Excellence in the Private Sector category, and the first Housing First project won Excellent Partnership category for the work with Porchlight, Golding Homes and Medway Housing Society. In addition, Michael Collins from Maidstone Borough Council Housing Advice Officer received a highly commended for the Excellent Young Professional of the Year category. Now to Waste Crime Team and our action in the borough. Our figures for the year now stand at 27 vehicles seized in relation to waste crime offences. 6 have been sold on, 4 crushed and 17 claimed back. 5 fly tipping... There have been 5 fly tipping fixed penalty notices, 4 of £400, 1 at £120. There are 13 waste carrier offences, £300 each. 6 duty of care notes, failure to produce, £300 each. 1 prosecution has gone through the courts and 3 are currently pending. This work will not stop unless the offenders stop. Our teams will be busy. This shows our attitude to these kinds of offences. Remembrance Sunday, what a special occasion where we was attended by so many residents, ex-servicemen and women and the Royal British Legion members and other groups and clubs, to mention so many who attended. I know that Julie and all our staff put so much work into the service and the parade, but without the soldiers and officers of 36 Engineers at the Evictor Barracks, it would not be as special. We are so proud of our service and our servicemen, and we thank them. Students from the Grow 19 project have joined Maidstone Borough Council to help them learn land-based and functional skills. These 5 students are quite literally getting their hands dirty with pitch marking, weeding, cutting back of shrubs, removing litter as part of the Maidstone Borough Council's ground maintenance and street cleansing teams. We have announced that we have become the new landlord of Loch Meadow in a bid to make the complex a key destination for leisure activities in the town centre. The council has bought a long lease interest and will be working on as an active landlord to make improvements to the appearance of the building and facilities. This will form part of our capital spend programme and should allow us to become more self-sufficient in the future. As part of Maidstone Borough Council's annual rough sleeper street count at the end of November, 3 people were found to be sleeping rough across the district of Maidstone. Our superb outreach team have offered support to accommodate these individuals found, and we have developed this outreach team to help the rough sleepers rebuild their lives and to reduce the number of people living on our streets. Maidstone Radio is now up and running after its launch in early December. Maidstone Borough Council has supported the new community service, which has a purpose-built radio station at the Maidstone Community Support Centre in Marsham Street. The radio station will now be on air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and will be broadcasting programmes including interviews, features and a good mix of music. Maidstone Museum has played a host to the craft fair, where more than 20 stalls trailing through the beautiful Elizabethan mansion, offering stunning and handmade goods. Father Christmas has also been dropping into his candlelit library at Maidstone Museum, and there may even be slots still available for those wishing to attend on the 19th and 20th from 10:30. The cosiest for Father Christmases is can be visited in our town, and where the children may receive a present. It's possibly the best Father Christmas experience in Kent. Thank you to the museum staff and volunteers and Maidstone Rotary Club for making this special season a true wonder for all who've attended. And there's just time left for me to say to our residents, our mayor, our chief exec, directors, officers and staff, and indeed to each and every one of you present here tonight, have a Merry Christmas, and here's to a positive and successful new year with 2020.
Thank you. I now call upon other group leaders to respond. You each have 5 minutes. Responding means to what was said by the leader. Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, first of all, I'd like to offer my congratulations to the awards that has been mentioned by Councillor Cox, the Housing Board. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and well done for those involved. That's really, really good to hear. I was really pleased to hear about the waste crime team. It's something, and fly tipping as well, but the waste crime team is something that we have argued for a long time to be fully resourced. It's very, very important, and I really wish to see that continue to be resourced. I don't want to see that being dropped off, because this is one of the most important things around, and they've done an extremely successful job. So I'm really pleased about that. I join with you at the Remembrance Sunday. I think it's important to remember that a lot of the areas in the borough have their own remembrance commemorations, and I and Councillor Bryce this year attended the one in our own village in Staplehurst, which was very moving as well. And this is very important that we keep this up. But I think my own father served in the Royal Navy in both World Wars, and it's for me a very personal thing, this particular service. So I do appreciate it. It's good to hear about Lock Meadow. I think that's a very good one. We've been involved with this for some time now, and I'm really pleased to hear that. So, and of course, the work of the outreach team we know is very, very important. And again, it's much appreciated, and I really am pleased to hear that. I'm not going to say any more because there's some big issues coming up, I know, on the agenda. But just to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas. I'm feeling quite chipper at the moment because of what happened last week, and I have to say. But I'm also a realist. I know there are ups and I know there are downs. And as a Crystal Palace supporter, I've experienced quite a few of those over the years. So, but I would like to wish you all, the staff and to the officers particularly, they work really hard for us. I know that. And and also colleagues here as well. Wish you all a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year, and I look forward to the new year. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor
And thank
Perry.
you as well very much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on Councillor Mrs Gooch.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in time for the bongs. No, I'll keep it short, sharp and sweet, but I will say I'm very proud, and I'm sure we're all very proud, of the staff that work on our behalf. And that's staff at all levels, whether it's the directors, chief exec, right down to the groundsman. I won't say down to the groundsman, but they are not at the highest level of pay, if you see what I mean. But they all do a darn good job. And the awards that they've earned during this year just goes to show that. So my congratulations to one and all. Was it that bad, Ryan? You have to walk out. Dear, oh dear. I have to say, the waste crime team has just excelled itself this year. I didn't really want to pick on any particular team, but the waste crime team really has done well. And I do echo Councillor Perry's words about he hopes that the team would not be reduced in any way. That filled me with horror when you said that. So if you get any hint that it is, let me know, and you and I will get on the case, but quick. Okay, rough sleeping. I must say how proud I am of the efforts that the staff have made in rough sleeping. I think we got down to 2 rough sleepers at one stage, but they're out there trying to prevent people getting out on the street in the first place. That is not what I hear about other boroughs. So we are really doing very well on that. Just one final thing, Leader, really. All this tosh about being the best Father Christmas. Now, come on, you know that you are the best Father Christmas, and he doesn't want anybody to know that he was the Father Christmas in the museum. And I've just given, I'm sorry children watching this webcast, but I know who Father Christmas is. May I wish you all a very Merry Christmas.
I'd like to turn around and say I didn't realise the leader of the council had spare time, but never mind. Don't I?
Saturday.
I would also now like to call on Councillor Mackay. Thank you, Labour Group.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members. Waste crime, I'm joining everybody else that we're nabbing these people and putting an end, I hope, to fly tipping. But what I will say this year, our refuse collection domestically in urban areas, for whatever reason, and I can see nods all around the chamber.
Councillor Mackay, I entirely agree with you because I live in that urban ward, but that isn't the topic we're talking about. I'm sorry.
Waste? Waste?
It is not a crime. It's been a pain in the neck.
Well, the
it's
waste
not
service.
A crime not to empty my bin.
I think the leader was talking about our waste service, and that certainly comes under the waste service. Now, so everybody has faced this problem, and I hope that, you know, I have a lot of sympathy for the guys that work on these trucks, you know, and I hope they can resolve it. Remembrance service, I think, was an excellent day and always is. And I'm pleased we didn't have to move the anything to accommodate it. Lock Meadow, can I say, as probably the only member, well, in fact I was, the only member of P&R that voted against the purchase of Lock Meadow. I'm delighted that the deal went through, and I hope it's a successful scheme. I do think that Lock Meadow is an important part of Maidstone. Rough sleepers, we've been successful with our rough sleeping because of government grants. And I hope that the current government continues that support and enables us to continue the good work. And as for Father Christmas, I think our leader has an advantage over most of us. He's certainly built for the job.
Oh. No, I was not that cruel.
And as someone quite rightly pointed out, it's the pot and the kettle. But can I wish you all a Merry Christmas, and let's hope for a prosperous New Year.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Well, if you could say something nice, Councillor Pell, you can stand up. Thank you.
I'm in a very jovial mood,
Thank
actually.
you.
It's Christmas, yeah. I just totally agree with what everybody said tonight. I mean, the work that's been done, the offers, everything that you've done has been absolutely excellent. The waste crime team, the only thing I would say is let's build on that success and maybe look at taking on an extra couple of people in the new year.
Yeah.
Long-term homeless, I think we've got the best record in Kent, and that is a record that we should be proud of. Yes, we have had money, but we haven't actually spent all of that money, so we've done it without the full funding. Absolutely wonderful. Happy Christmas and a very new year, everybody.
Well done.
Straight to the point. Thank you, Councillor Bell. I will now open up the items for questions from council members for a period of 15 minutes. Questions must relate to the issue raised by the leader and the other group leaders in their speeches. They will be answered as directed by questions and will not require response from all group leaders. Thank you. I open that up. Any questions? Councillor Harper.
Well, I've been asked to ask this question, so I'd like to ask Father Christmas. He referred to in the museum the excellent work done by volunteers such as Maidstone Museum Foundation and our Invictus ambassadors. I just wondered if he would like to inform the council of any other projects he's aware of where we have volunteers from schools or other parts of the community.
So,
We talked about volunteers at the museum.
oh dear.
Thank you very much. You'll understand that it's not 5 minutes is not very long to bring you everything that one would like to say. And I don't know how many councillors actually know that 70 of the sixth form pupils from Invicta Grammar School came and planted 11,000 bulbs around Moat Park. And it is only with some of the volunteer groups that actually help us around the borough in places such as Moat Park, Vinters Valley Trust, Hale Park, other nature reserves, that we are able to do the extra things due to the cuts that we have had to endure over the years. And I definitely did mention the volunteers that helped at the museum, and thank you very much for asking me the question, which you so delightfully told everybody I'd like to be asked. So thank you very much. But I hope this absolutely shows that we do thank and we need the people and the volunteers of Maidstone who help us bring the extra things to the town. Thank you.
Before I call on Councillor Mortimer to answer, as my role of mayor, I meet volunteers every day. They feed people. They wash people. I'm sorry to be so angry, but it's not just down to the museum. I see genuine people tell me they've washed a stranger because there's not enough carers around. So if we want to talk about volunteers, they're the ones you don't even know their names, because they just come up to me and say, I do that. I feed 5 old people. I do that. I wash 5 people. So if anybody wants to congratulate volunteers, do all them people that do it for nothing. They're never asked, they just do it. So that's a Merry Christmas, and that's what I call a volunteer. Sorry, that's my word.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I ask the leader regarding the outreach team whether he could enlighten us and give us more details of the work of the outreach team, please?
As our mayor has alluded to, there are so many different people that are the volunteers of this town, and I wholeheartedly endorse what you've said. The outreach team manages and has located the people who are homeless within our borough and have encouraged them and helped them to have happier lives. They've helped them find GP services. They will have been able to help them with amounts of treatment that they can get, maybe for substance abuse. I actually went back to the floor and I spent a day with them. One was an absolutely terrible experience where we were moving people out of a location in Maidstone. But I would say to everybody in this town, there are the people who are not as fortunate as many, and our outreach team helps them to find housing, temporary accommodation, and may even repatriate them back to the countries where they came from, or the parts of the country, indeed Scotland, Wales, wherever they came from. Our team helps them relocate if they want that. And I think that within the last 12 months, to have reduced this figure by 90-odd% is fantastic. And we must thank that part of our borough, the outreach team, for the fantastic work and the continued effort that they do.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Pearl.
Might I begin by asking the leader to convey my appreciation also to the outreach team. I'm delighted that the count of rough sleepers appears to be down to 3 people. But at the risk of sounding cynical, might I ask why 4 of those 3 people appear to be living in tents in Watman Park next to my house? And when can those 4 people expect their cases to be resolved?
I will bring that up with the outreach team in the morning, and if you want to be there, I will be there at 9 o'clock in the morning at Marsham Street, Mr. Pearl. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Leader, just a quick question. You mentioned volunteers, you've talked about community tonight. I wonder if you would agree with me that there's an awful lot of unsung heroes in this particular borough, and I know that the Mayor held some great tea parties over the summer, and I would like to encourage her to continue with that, and I hope you will support me in this, to maybe have further tea parties for the unsung heroes, so actually they can be congratulated for the work that they do.
I promise to sort that straight in the new year. Thank you.
I will help in any way I can.
So I have nobody else down on my list. So I take it we can move forward. And item 13, I call upon Councillor Cox to move the recommendation of the Policy and Resource Committee relating to Maidstone Property Holdings Unlimited, governance arrangements, recommendations on pages 9 to 10.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move as the recommendations are on 9 to 10. So I propose that.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Perry, thank you.
Please, a second. Thank you.
What do I do now? Is that sorted? Sorry?
And then you say, are the recommendations agreed?
Yeah. Are the recommendations... I don't know if that's your mayor, Malcolm. Oh, no, it's Councillor Harper's.
We wondered from the Labour group why the report, in terms of transparency, the directors of Maidstone Property Holdings Limited are going to be officers as opposed to councillors or a mixture of councillors and officers. I don't know whether the leader of the council would like to clarify that.
Policy and resources agreement. Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
I realise this is slightly outside normal protocol, but if I can just advise that when the company was originally set up, it was done through the Policy and Resources Committee, and that was the decision of the committee. Clearly, if you wish to change that, then you can review that position.
The only problem I would see with that, if we're going to change it every year, the chairman of Policy and Resources, and that would incur more costs having to change it each time. If a member of staff comes away from that board, then that would possibly be less rotation of the people on the board. The board can be interviewed by any one of us from Policy and Resources, and indeed they come and present to us, I believe. So there is a time and a place to do that.
Wasn't
Sorry,
sure whether you were calling
Councillor English, my mic is playing up.
I would, in general, agree with Councillor Harper. I think this could potentially be a very important body for the borough. And I do think, personally, having looked at it, that I'm not happy with the governance arrangements. However, the appropriate mechanism for that would be to approve it tonight and to review those governance arrangements rather than to delay it. So, provided we can actually make appropriate amendments at due course of Policy and Resources, I think we should approve it tonight. But I have to say, personally, I do believe that as it is a body it's going to be hopefully of increasing significance, that member involvement and clear lines of reporting to committee, and it's not clear how that works in this report.
Sorry, Councillor English, I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you recommend any changes?
I'm saying that I think we should approve it tonight, but we would, as the Chief Executive says, take the opportunity, if we so wish, to review it at P&R later. But I do believe we need to move forward with establishing this tonight.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So that's Councillor English. Councillor Blackmore, please.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. If we're about to approve this, then that's absolutely fine. If we're not, then I'm sorry, I disagree with both Councillor Harper and Councillor English, because if I remember correctly, when this was set up, we gave them delegated authority. Otherwise, you'll have members dipping in, dipping out, and it gets really, really messy and very untidy. At any time, we can call for a report. We can call for something to be taken to Policy and Resources. So you don't necessarily need members scuttling around on it every single day of the week. I think, to be fair, I would rather we kept it as it is. By all means, refer it to P&R. But actually, if you want something changed, shouldn't it go to democracy?
Sorry, I did not say that I wanted to be referred. I said we should approve it tonight, and then P&R can review it in due course. I'm not proposing anything different tonight than has been proposed and seconded.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mackay.
I think Councillor English has covered my point. As long as we can, at a later stage, review this decision.
We all know that we can take our decisions anytime we want to committees. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, we've been talking a lot about maximum transparency this evening. I actually think that if members have some sort of involvement with this, that will help transparency. I mean, they don't actually have to be on the decision-making side of it, they just need to be there. Otherwise, we'll be accused of sort of making decisions in smoke-filled rooms and all that sort of thing, which used to go on in the past. So I really do think that there should be member involvement. And to respond to Councillor Cox's comment, it should be done by position of an individual, not by the individual themselves, but by the position they hold. So, for example, chair of P&R, so whoever takes over then is automatically one of the observers to the proceedings of that meeting. So I think that's what we should be doing.
Can you speak up a little bit more, Mr. Councillor Atkinson, because it's really mumble.
Sorry. So I do think that there should be member involvement so that we can have maximum transparency.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl. Councillor Pearl.
I'd sort of like to make 2 points in this regard. Firstly, there is member involvement. If you read through the totality of the documents, you'll see that significant matters are reserved for shareholders, and the shareholder function is exercised by the Policy and Resources Committee. Forgive me for pointing this out, but one of us uniquely went through those documents line by line, gave possibly more grief than I ought to have done in open session to the poor legal officer at the time. I think the Mid-Kent Legal Services deserve sort of thanks for the work they've done on the documents subsequently. My second point is that there is a long history, sadly, in local government of councillors acting as directors of companies, and the results aren't pretty. One only has to look at colleagues in Northumbria and the example of Arch Property Holdings and the police investigation around that to know what I'm talking about.
So can we kindly move to the vote now, please? Thank you. Sorry. Are the recommendations agreed? Thought they would be. We will now move on. Does anybody need a comfort break? We have been going quite a long while.
If you want to suggest it.
I'm just asking, because I know it's a busy night, but does anybody wish to have a comfort break? Because it has gone on a little bit. I am more than happy for that to happen.
Till 8:45.
Till 8:45. You what?
8:30? 8:30, that's fine.
8:30, whatever you wish. You're wasting your time if you're still sitting there. Thank you. Everybody, everybody. Yeah. Just to inform you, it's Russell that is stuck in the lift. Russell. So, our other officer is dealing with it, so it means that we can carry on. He's on his own, but we're talking to him on the phone. I'm sure it'll be out for Christmas. You what? Sorry. Yeah. Right. I quite like doing that now. Yeah, quiet please, as Councillor Robertson has asked. So now we will carry on, thank you. Right, so where are we now? Item 14. Item 14, everybody. I call upon Councillor Cox to move the recommendation of the Policy and Resource Committee relating to the Council Tax Reduction Scheme 2020 to 2021. Recommendations start on page 109.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. The recommendation is that the 2019-2020 Council Tax Reduction Scheme be carried forward to the 2020-21 with no changes to the scheme. I so propose.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Perry, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? No, thank you very much. Is the recommendation agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now we're on to item 15, Policy and Resource Committee. I call upon Councillor Cox to move the recommendation of the Policy and Resource Committee regarding the medium-term financial strategy 2020-21 to 24-25. Recommendations on page 259.
Thank you very much. Recommendations are that 1, the medium-term financial strategy 2020 to 2021 and to 2024-25 as set out at the Appendix A to this report be adopted. 2, that the financial assumptions underlying the medium-term financial strategy be endorsed. 3, that the council tax setting principle as set out in this report be agreed. I so move.
Is that second? Sorry, there was an arm shoot out there, but I can't see the body. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Did you get that? Thank you. I'll look around to see if there's anybody else. No, so I take it that's agreed? Thank you very much. There is no oral report from the Communities Housing Environment Committee on this occasion. Item 17, Notice of Motion, Housing Numbers. I call upon Councillor Janetta Sams to move her motion relating to the housing numbers. I understand that in moving her motion, Councillor Sams wishes to make some alterations and the amendment motion has been circulated. Has everybody got that? Has everybody had time to read it? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Maidstone Borough Councillors seem to be secretive and uncaring of communities' views and determined to do whatever is needed to deliver the government's housing targets. We've heard more from the press, the KM, the Downs Mail and through social media than from our own council, which has been reactive and often economical with its utterances. And we have to say at present we're most unhappy with how it's all unwinding. I'd rather it be for football, but Maidstone is top of the league at something else, house building, 10% greater than any other authority in Kent. Councillor Gooch has said central government requires us to meet incredibly high housing targets. With government's housing targets, they've really set silly numbers. It's very upsetting. Councillor Perry has said transport infrastructure is so obviously lacking. A lot of people will suffer quite needless anxiety as a result. Anxieties are seriously heightened by this culture of secrecy and subterfuge. He says, I always thought a call for sites would be a bad idea. And he's recently said about the default position being maximum transparency. Councillor Fort has said the roads are descending into chaos. We need to stop, pause and rethink. Councillor Newton, and we wish him well, has said development is wrecking the place. And to add to this, we have Councillor Burton meeting councillors to see what areas of the borough we have consensus on, drawing circles on the plan of the borough on the wall and asking us to choose the least worst option. We're looking at gridlock, destruction of the AOMB. We're building on valuable green spaces, building roads that no one wants, to create thousands more housing, creating communities with no workable infrastructure. Councillor Fort says it's chaos. We agree. Chaos for health, demands being put on medical and emergency services. Chaos for our air quality, more vehicles, traffic, congestion and gridlock over the borough. Chaos for mobility of the residents, impacting upon employment, education and recreation. Chaos for our open spaces being reduced and the obvious effect on the wildlife and our natural environment. And chaos for climate change, the detrimental consequences upon the emergency we face. This council obviously has the money. It can afford to buy Lock Meadow lease for 19 million. It can have a 150k punt on a garden community in Lenham. So why can we not resource and pay for a report to tell the government why we cannot afford this scale of housing to continue, with evidence to show that it is undeliverable? In simple terms, enough is enough. We have to change the way we review with immediate effect. And we call on the elected councillors to come together to have a non-party political, non-blaming, open discussion on it. We need a complete survey, a proper analysis and a strategic, sustainable plan. We need to think about people above politics. We need to call upon councillors to sign up to this council motion. One of our MPs, Helen Whately, stated clearly, what would be really good and help me if Maidstone can say it's really difficult to do this. It's difficult for me to go to the government and say the housing numbers are too high if Maidstone Borough Council are saying, yes, we can do this. There we have it from one of our MPs, leadership and clear direction. It can be done. If we do not, the effects will be felt over our entire borough. We will be quite rightly accused of not standing up for all the people of Maidstone, including Allington, Barming, Bearsted, Coxheath, Detling, Fan, I could go through them all, Hollingbourne, Harwich, Headcorn, etc., etc. It's all our wards and all our residents in our great town. And in 20 to 30 years, where many of the council chamber here will not be alive to see it, the right decision made tonight can materially change the well-being of all and the future health and happiness of our residents. Fundamentally, the provision of housing, which is the numbers-based rather than the assessing the needs of the community, is flawed. The only beneficiaries will be the developers, some landowners and planning consultants. Let's put people first. Please support the motion in its entirety, wholeheartedly and enthusiastically. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. And thank you for your applause. I always like to see residents stick by their councillor. I will now ask the Chief Executive to explain the process. Thank you.
Okay, so somewhat unusually, the proposer of the motion has actually put forward an amended motion, which she is entirely entitled to do. And I understand why that has occurred, given that our agenda was published in the pre-election period, and now we're out of that. So the process now, I just thought I would explain so that we're clear, is that the seconder of the motion, who is Councillor Powell, will be invited to say whether or not he supports the motion as amended. And then we will ask everybody else whether you accept that it's the amended motion that you will then debate. Of course, there may be other amendments that come forward during the course of that debate. Once we've done that, Councillor Powell then can go through the normal process of being the seconder of the motion and decide whether or not he wishes to speak or reserve his right to speak. So if we might start with Councillor Powell saying whether or not you are happy that you are seconding the amended motion.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to second the motion.
Happy to accept the amended motion.
Can I ask now, is everybody ready to accept for debate? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's good. So can you ask Councillor Powell whether he wishes to speak or reserve his right?
Councillor Powell, do you wish to... Councillor Powell, do you wish to speak now or reserve your rights?
No, I will speak now. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
My response in keeping with tonight will be brief. Pleasant, I hope. Yeah. Given that the facts are very evident in what Janetta's proposal just said, I'm going to try and be a little bit more poignant tonight. As a seconder of this motion, I give full support, but I must make the following points. Firstly, I believe that this council has not done enough due diligence in its reviewing of the roads and transport from the 2017 plan. We're at a review stage, but much work is still needed with the implementation of what we did initially. It is a myth to suggest, as officers and many fellow members in this chamber tonight have suggested, that our local plan will protect us from further development. And here we are, 4 years on, according to this paper tonight, another 9,200 properties. Well, that was news to me, because I wasn't sure whether it was 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, or however many thousand. I'm just going to, in keeping with what Janetta has just mentioned, is just to give a couple of quotes, what other people have actually said. And if I can quote Councillor Cox, first of all, speaking on Radio Kent on the 7th of November. We have work to do on that figure. We are not that happy. We will be challenging this. We are going to write to the central government. Have spoken to the Conservative leader, drafting a letter in the next couple of days. We may well have drafted a letter in the next couple of days. I certainly haven't seen it. I'm not sure whether any other members here have seen that letter. There was a rep from Marden asked how we are going to push back against these numbers. Geraldine Brown from Calc. Our simple message to you for this meeting is that the number for housing needs derived from a simple application of the government's methodology. It's not chiselled on a tablet of stone. It is susceptible to challenge and shaping over the years ahead, if there is the will to do so. A similar story is flying around suggesting that if we don't implement what we are told, then the government's going to do it for us. The amount of times I've heard that. But if we had the evidence in our defence and the commitment from this particular chamber and officers to go back to the government, take time, speak to more groups of people that are here tonight and elsewhere, what I would say as members, we will have the evidence and we will gain more evidence in coming weeks. I mean, this notion, as already mentioned, this motion is not about politics. It's simply about protecting the quality of life for the people that we represent, the residents of the Borough of Maidstone. And each one of us has a responsibility. So please support this motion and do what is right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Thank you. I consider it to be convenient and sorry, I can't read this red writing.
Conducive.
To the dispatch of business that the motion be dealt with at this meeting. A factual briefing note has been circulated. The debate will be subject to normal council debating rules. Has everybody seen this? Yes? Yes? Okay. During the debate... No,
You don't have to read that.
no, I don't have to read that one, sorry.
Councillor Perry's raised.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Sands and Councillor Powell for putting forward this motion. It's the sentiments behind it, I think, I fully understand. But in the reality, we have to live in the real world, and politics and life is about the art of the possible. Now, Maidstone Borough Council does recognise that it actually has to apply a standard methodology. And it notes that through its current local plan, adopted in 2017, Maidstone has already made significant contribution to homes and houses. Maidstone is in a strong position because it has an agreed local plan. That is very important. And I can't accept your view, Councillor Powell, that the local plan has not had a good effect. It has had a very good effect. And it has kept our target of a 5-year housing supply, which we don't have is a developer's charter. We all know that. So I think that has to be always taken into consideration. We also recognise that homes are needed. This is not a crime. Homes aren't something that we shouldn't have. Getting an impression that we shouldn't be building. Homes are needed. We have young people, we have people wanting to come into the borough. We've heard this already through some of the questions, that homes are needed. And I think we have to understand that and accept it. The problem is, and I get this point, is the infrastructure. There is a lack of supporting infrastructure and investment in supporting infrastructure. So these targets cannot be met unless we do have proper investment in infrastructure, and I certainly support and recognise that. But it also recognises, and this is, I think, absolutely crucial in this, that the time scale that we've been set is very challenging, very, very demanding. And any delay in this timetable will cause a delay in the local plan. And if we don't have a revised local plan in place, then we're open to further development. So perversely, though I understand where you're coming from on your motion, actually, part of it, I think, would lead to more housing development rather than less. You're throwing away your actual control, and I think that would be extremely, extremely dangerous. So what I would like to do, I've read your motion very carefully, and I think I would like to go through, if you bear with me, point by point, because I do have a proposal to amend the motion. Now, I believe that's going to be distributed around at this point in time. But while that's being done, we'll go through it and then we can come back to the particular points, okay? So in your point 1, which you say temporarily suspend its analysis of more than 300 sites.
we need to get it as soon as possible because we're running out of time.
I'll have to. Well, yeah, okay. Well, as the motion is, to me, this won't work. I want to move the amended motion as being put forward in front of you now, which hopefully I do think sets the same spirit. Of
That's
things.
fine. So I'm quite happy as Mayor to let you go forward on that, yeah.
Oh, you're allowing me to continue?
Go on, I'll let you. It's Christmas.
Marion, you're a star. Thank you very, very
Christmas.
much. I think it will help if I try and give just a bit of an explanation of what we tried to do here. In the first point, and you'll see it in front of you, I've redrafted it to, in fact, concentrate really more on the call for sites. Now, this was a question raised earlier on this evening, so I think it does have a lot of relevance. And what I've said is, the redraft, expedite the review of all the sites submitted in the call for sites process to identify those that appear prima facie unsuitable. And I think that's a very key issue, and I think it was raised in one of the questions. And I think that does meet the points that you're saying. Now, in your point 2, you talk about the consultation process. And what I'm really saying here is we already have a consultation process in place. So I've redrafted it with that in mind. And I mean, I've been part of this because I attended, as a parish councillor, I attended a very detailed consultation here in Maidstone House, and it was a very, very useful process. So I've redrafted this. So it says now, acknowledge there has already been consultation on the key issues for the local plan review to address. And I think that is absolutely right. And this is the point, and ensure that residents, community groups, parish councils continue to make use of the current consultation process and are given, and here again, every opportunity through this consultation process to express their views. I think that's very important, and I do think that continues with the spirit that you put in your motion. Now, in point 3, I've gone a bit further because I think here we are starting to work very closely with Kent County Council, and I think what I wanted to say here is that we work with KCC, that's very, very important, and with other Kent councils, because the other Kent councils are in the same boat as we are, so I think we need to emphasise, and with our members of Parliament, and I take the point that was raised by Councillor Sams on that. But it's very important that we lobbying the relevant government departments and ministers to revise the standardised methodology, because it's the methodology that is causing the problem. So we need to do that. And we need to lobby ministers to tell them that this is a major issue for this, and has resulted in this 40% uplift, which again is a major issue. And I've taken your words here, where I've ended it by saying, which based on current local conditions and constraints, and your words, will be impossible to deliver. And I fully understand your point on that. The next point, point 4, again, I take your point about the newly elected MPs. I've kept the draft pretty well the same, except I've taken out the very last bit, which says representing the people of Maidstone's wishes. I don't know what the people of Maidstone's wishes actually are. I'm not Harry Potter. I can't wave a wand and find out what it is. So I think I understand that, but I've kept pretty well the same draft, but taken out that bit because I think that some people want more homes, some people don't. It's a movable feast to a certain extent. And I've added a final para because I wanted to strengthen the whole point about meeting the political decision makers here. And what I've actually said here is invite the leaders of all the political groups. I think this is very important. We have a strong consensus view here to send a joint letter, and we've put a specific date on it, to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, setting out the Council's concerns regarding the housing target and the lack of appropriate investment in infrastructure. I do believe this is very, very important because we need to make every effort to engage with our ministers, with our MPs, and with the decision makers. So that's what this is the revised motion that I would like to move. I do believe it keeps the spirit, of the current motion, but I think it's practical and it is possible to deliver, and it doesn't leave us with one of my favourite phrases, a hostage to fortune for the future. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for indulging me and allowing me to speak a bit longer.
You're welcome. Is there a seconder for these amendments? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Okay. Now we can go to the debate. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, I've got... Do you wish to speak, Councillor?
Thank you very much. As the seconder, I have gone through this amended motion with Councillor Perry. We formulated this and I endorse the sense behind it, led and has come from the original motion. I will say that we have now got this strategic working infrastructure group that comprises of councillors from both authorities and also the MPs. They have a voice within this. It's not necessarily part of the process itself. It's not set in stone that they have to meet and therefore formulate something that will go to SPI, but it enables Kent County Councillors, the Highways Authority and ourselves as the Planning Authority to be in the same room and to talk about things that are relevant and that are relevant to our residents that have to sit in the traffic. And we can urge them, and especially the MPs, to actually act on our behalf about things that are specific that we need, not just generalisations. So we will be asking them to get face-to-face meetings with the ministers so that we can say this process is not fit for purpose as we sit. Yes, we have a local plan. We had it since 2017. Yes, we are delivering the 883 houses that they've asked us to do. But one thing that we haven't talked about here is the market. We can increase what the government tell us to do, and they'll hold a bat over our heads and say, if you don't do it, we'll send somebody in and we'll tell you where to build them. We've just done a call for sites. We've got 334 they can choose from. But we will not achieve the correct infrastructure. We will not achieve the transport, the enhancements to the rail, possibilities for different bus services. We won't achieve this because they will set this increased ceiling of 40% uplift, which brings us to a staggering 1,236 new houses they will ask us to build by 2036. That's 1,236 a year. Okay? Now, we do have our 5-year land supply protection, but if we stop this process and imagine it as like a spinning plate, it is a difficult thing to achieve. We don't want to stop spinning the plate because we do want to question this figure of 1,236, but we cannot stop the process of the review. If we do, we will lose our 5-year land supply, and then the developers that have put forward all these sites will push forward and just say, well, I'm going to build there, and you can't do anything because you don't have a 5-year land supply protection.
Time's up, Councillor Cox, but yeah.
Please consider everything that's in front of you. Thank you.
Before we go any further, can I ask Councillor Janetta Sams and Councillor Powell, are you happy with the amendments presented by Councillor Perry?
No.
No, fine. So we'll carry on to the debate.
Debate on the amendment.
So we're debating on the amendment. Councillor Daly.
Well, if you really wanted proof that we do not actually live in a democracy, then all you've got to do is to look at the planning regime that is in force at the moment. Because in the National Planning Policy Framework, which we were given to understand in 2012, would take into account local opinion, that the old arcane system would be swept away and we would have a completely new way of planning. And what's happened, there are umpteen dozen sentences that come after that foreword that actually prove that you can't do any of that. Any local opinion is swept away. If you come up with something that is against the planning policy framework, you will have an unelected somebody comes down in the form of an inspector who will tell you what will do and what won't do, and they will overturn anything you have refused, and they will also sweep away any conditions that you might have put on it in the first place. So I come back to this business again. This is not a democracy, in a sense, in the planning system. It is totally do as you're told, or we will do it for you. I have to ask whether common sense actually comes into a lot of things regarding planning. What is an affordable house? Please tell me, what is an affordable house? I've had houses built round me at the moment, £500,000. 20% of that is supposed to be, or 30% is supposed to be affordable, and that's about £345,000. You know, I mean, what is affordable? I don't know. You tell me. But all I do know is this, that our roads are gridlocked. We have no control over that because that's a highways thing. Our hospital, our general hospital, is gridlocked on a daily basis, and it takes the people who work there 45 minutes to get out of it and down to the bottom of Hermitage Lane, and it goes on and on and on, and it's inexorable. We're supposed to have anti-coalescence between our communities, and I live on the northwest fringe of Maidstone, supposed to be separated from Ditton, and we have a coalescence now. It goes right the way through to Borough Green nearly. There's no green space left. Everything is choked. And in my particular area, and I do sympathise with Lenham, I've had 5,500 houses built in my ward in the last 6 years. You know, so I do sympathise with everybody, but I do see this business of the planning system being totally broken. Now, it's your government on that side, and now you've got a majority, please use it properly, I would hope. And our MPs have got to help us in this. And you know, we can keep on arguing about it. I wish this amendment well. I would like to see it passed. I would like to think that it had any hope of being successful. But I doubt it, because I think we're all whistling in the wind, because we do not live, actually, in a democracy. I'm sorry about that, but there we are, Madam.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I now call upon Councillor Blackmore, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Daly. I disagree with you. I think we live in more of a democracy than many other countries around the world. So I think we have to be grateful for what we have. And we also have to work within the structure that we have. Now, we may not like the National Planning Policy Framework, but that is the tool, a slightly crude tool, that we have at present. So all we can do is work within that. If we suspend looking at all the sites now, we take away the certainty we have. When the planning inspector came down, however many years ago it was, the decision was you have to have a review. You have to have it adopted by 2021. We missed that deadline, and I'm afraid it's a free-for-all. So personally, I would rather stick with certainty. I can understand everyone's anger about this. Where I live, I will have 2,000 properties just behind me. Some of them are allegedly affordable, some aren't. But I do think timing is everything. If we suspend looking at all the sites, we lose our momentum. We've done this before. When you've been around for as long as I have, cycles come and go. So does anybody remember the KIG project? Under a previous government, it was going to go from, I think, Junction 8 all the way down to Bearsted Station and cover many, many hectares. I can't remember the exact number. We stopped looking at sites, we stopped looking at our local plan, and the Borough Council concentrated on the KIG project, because at the time that was deemed to be the most sensible thing to do. You speak to anyone in the planning department now. Wrong, 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 stupid. We shouldn't have done it. We should have run the two things in parallel. My concern is you suspend looking at all the sites, you've lost that momentum, we've got the appropriate staff there to deal with it and get this adopted review done, and if we don't, the legislation may not have changed in our favour. So if we sit there and we hang our hat on changing the legislation when we're unable to, we will have lost the momentum behind the adopted review of the local plan. That is why I am backing this amendment, and I do not want to see a suspension of the review of all those sites.
Thank you. We now go on to Councillor Mackay, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've just been told to keep this short, but I intended to in any case. I do have sympathy for the original amended motion from Eddie and Janetta, and I understand where it's coming from. And much as it pains me to agree with Councillor Perry, well, some redeeming features, Councillor Perry. I must agree that his motion, I agree with. I will keep it there.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. I'd also now like to call on Councillor Val Springett, please.
Thank you, Mrs Mayor. I think there's very few councillors that actually don't agree with the sentiment of this. I think we all have said enough is enough and we've done enough houses. Councillor Blackmore's just referred to KIG. It's KIG that got me into politics. Some of you will remember. I was part of the campaign. We were delighted when Maidstone suspended work on its then core strategy. We went, yes, great, how fantastic is that? And boy, did that cause a problem 3.5 years later when the KIG decision was made. And Maidstone was so far behind the game that we ended up with no 5-year land supply. I have 100 houses going up at the bottom of my garden because we didn't have a 5-year land supply in the most ridiculous place, being sold at the most ridiculous prices. So we're not building the right size and quality of houses in the right place. I support Councillor Perry's motion. I know there'll be a suspicion that rushing through the looking at the calls for sites will mean things will speed up, but I think we do need to evaluate the sites and remove the inappropriate ones. That's after that we need a pause. I do not wish to see us go to any more of the formal process beyond that point, but hopefully while we're doing this our MPs will work with us to get some agreement from government to amend their way of calculating the numbers. If we just try and go shan't, we will lose, we'll end up with no 5-year land supply and it will be a disaster. So I cannot support the original motion as amended on point 1. I cannot support it on point 1, but I would support Councillor Perry's motion, which is trying to achieve the same, but without putting the council in a vulnerable position and at the behest of developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Springett. I would like to call on Councillor Tom Sams, please.
Before I speak, Madam Mayor, can I ask a point of order on transparency and courtesy? Councillor Sams and Councillor Powell submitted to all councillors a motion and amended under PERDA, and you had good notice on that. And yet tonight we've arrived here and we've been handed a piece of paper, the amendment, and a briefing note. And this could and should have been circulated previously by email, so we've had 20 minutes to look at it and to analyse it. And as a matter of courtesy and for future practice, if it's possible to actually do that in a reasonable way, I think that would be really, really helpful. Right, now I'd like to start. Can I thank the Lenham Heath residents for attending tonight, asking questions that were not fully answered. And on courtesy, I'm less than happy about Councillor Mackay's comments to Mr Proctor about Lenham Heath. I think it was discourteous. I'm going to read John Horn, who was a member here for many years. Of the local plan, it's now conceded that some of the inquiry evidence was unsafe. The local plan review is itself now based upon an unsafe or unsatisfactory document. He continued, of the call for sites, there has been widespread criticism that the consultation process was flawed. There are legitimate constraints that can be put forward. The answer we get from NBC is there's no appetite to challenge the figures, no constraint, so it is unconstrained building. Given that we are looking at somewhere in the region of 30,000 new dwellings imposed on a medieval infrastructure with 2 motorways through it, can we reasonably sustain the level of growth without substantial infrastructure investment? Helen Whately commented, how do we manage that supply and demand pressure to protect our countryside? We have the Lenham Heath proposal, for example, and those residents are here tonight. A member of the Joint Parish Group said, the recent consultation is an absolute disgrace. We had 500 replies. Part of the reason is because the questions were all slanted to give the answers that officers wanted to hear. Also, the mechanics of the consultation didn't work. A lot of people struggled with it. John Horn commented further, the dilemma is that government has set a housing target that is not working at this location. Helen Whately finished off the JPG meeting by stated of NBC, but what can really be good to help me would be if Maidstone can say it's very difficult for us to do this. It's difficult for me to go to government and say the housing numbers are too high. If Maidstone Borough Council says, yes, we can do that. Now, I've heard a lot of guff tonight, to be honest with you. I've heard guff from our leader of our council in as much as that we talk about speed and momentum. Heaven's sake, it takes too much to write a letter that's not been written yet. I've heard other guff. I've heard things from other councillors talking about where it's possible to deliver sensible numbers, appropriate numbers. More councillors have said, easy roads in, easy roads out. It's absolute nonsense. It just cannot happen. And I suppose to finally finish, I'd like to talk about, I found Jerry from Marden. And Jerry said, I would have expected a concerted effort by councillors to involve their local MPs and neighbouring councillors in an energetic counter to this unrealistic proposal, not supine acceptance of whatever they are told to do, as it appears to be the case. To be honest with you, councillors, I'm really, really disappointed. It's taken this motion in the first place to get you actually discuss it. Otherwise, we'd just be going through the process. And I'm really, really disappointed that we think that that's okay. Now, you'll get your motion through. I totally accept that. But the way we're doing it is not going to be supported by the residents out there. Someone said they couldn't be Harry Potter. I reckon I could be Harry Potter because I know exactly what those residents want. And they don't want all those houses that we will get in 2037, 30,000. And none of us will be able to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sang. Thank you. Thank you. I understand. I really, really do understand. I'd like to call on Councillor Mumford, please.
The difference in the two motions are just purely whether we continue to look at the call for sites. That, to me, is the difference. Now, I can see that sort of number 2 to 5 is looking at reducing and accommodating the numbers. It's exactly what our residents and members want. We want a reduced number. I've worked on a planning committee without a 5-year housing land supply. That is soul destroying. The penalties come in. They are mathematical. They don't have a meeting and say things. They are mathematical and they come in immediately. If we achieve what 2 to 5 on the new amendment is trying to achieve, the residents and the members will rejoice. And we will be in a position to allocate the right number of houses. If, however, we fail and our MPs fail to reduce that number, if we stop work on the call for sites, will not be in a position to have a 5-year housing land supply. And by then, well, if that happens, the residents will not be happy in the course of action we have taken, because not to have a 5-year land supply is bad. I've experienced it. I think a lot of us have experienced it. We must have a fallback position. And that fallback position should be, if we fail to reduce those numbers, we must have a 5-year housing land supply. It would be folly not to.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harper, please.
The amended resolutions we're discussing, obviously, as everybody has said, apart from a few people, seem to make utter sense. We need the 5-year housing supply. We need to get the local plan in place. The one thing I think I would support Councillor Sams on is about consultation. And I can see Councillor Pearl nodding. We only recently experienced this in terms of the council's approach on the town centre areas of opportunity, and in particular Maidstone West. And I'm sure most people here are aware of the issues which came up in terms of the Broadway shopping centre and the high level of public concern over that. We did suggest that the council hold a public meeting prior to adopting those plans at the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee, so that the council officers could actually explain their proposals to people, listen to their proposals, and then bring them back to the committee. And obviously they didn't, and we got to a situation where, again, like tonight, we had a massive attendance in the public gallery, and we had to get the proposal thrown out. So I think on number 2, where we're talking about current consultation process, I would just urge that the council to think about the consultation, to make sure that the council is more proactive than it has tended to be. Because whilst the legislation gives you a reactive approach to consultation, you need to be proactive, and that's how you can actually engage with residents and hopefully, through dialogue, come to better decision making. And so as we work through this, and there are, 300 sites, I think the council needs to look in the particular areas of concern on a proactive approach to consultation, because otherwise we are just going to have thousands of people, campaigning on various things against all the 300 sites. And whilst obviously that's people's rights, if the council, talks to people in a sensible way, we can diffuse a lot of uncertainty. And in terms of people feeling their properties being blighted, I just urge us all to consider how we take forward the current consultation processes. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
So we need to
move
to the vote on the amendment now?
First amendment.
The one that was proposed by Councillor Perry.
Right, that's right.
Councillor Perry can sum
So
up. Councillor Perry can sum up.
So if you're quite happy to sum up, Councillor Perry, on the motion, then we can go to the vote.
I'll be very brief. And I think Councillor Mumford said it all, and Councillor Blackmore. The 5-year housing supply is absolutely vital. We cannot hold up the local plan process. The timescale is extremely tight. I believe that the amendment does cover the issues that were raised in the original amendment. I think particularly points 2 to 5 have tried to do that, and I would like to urge that you support the amendment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he did, but he used his right to speak, so you go to the vote now.
We go straight to the vote now, because Councillor Cox used his right to speak and to second the Councillor Perry's motion. So can I have a vote, please? For all in favour? Oh, sorry, of the amendments of Councillor Perry. Yes, it's Councillor Perry's amendment we're doing. And against, please.
Abstentions.
Any abstentions?
Yep. So the amendment is carried, and then we need to vote on it as the substantive motion.
Yeah. So that motion is carried, but now...
No, that amendment.
No, that amendment, sorry. So now we got the vote on the amendment again, yes.
As the substantive.
Yeah. So 4. Wherever it is, our group is. Thank you. Against? Any abstentions? 3. Thank you. That's carried.
Yeah,
So the motion, Councillor Perry's motion has been carried. Thank you.
So moving on to item 18.
We're now moving on to item 18. Sorry. Bye, Tom. Bye, Janetta. Thank you, residents, for coming. It was much appreciated. Right, councillors. Councillors, let's move on to the next item, please. Which is item what now, Alison?
18.
Item 18. This one, yeah. I call upon Councillor Perry to move the motion relating to the membership of committees. Councillor Perry.
Apologies, Madam Mayor, you've been sick of my voice at this stage. But,
That's okay.
This motion seeks to amend the current constitution to allow members to be appointed to both the Licensing Committee and to the Planning Committee. It is recognised that these are statutory committees. They're very important committees, and we all know that, which carry out quasi-legal functions. But it's not a legal requirement to prevent members from serving on both committees simultaneously. And in fact, many councils do allow this to take place. These committees perform an important statutory function, and it is essential from a democratic perspective that they are fully appointed and reflect as closely as possible the political makeup of the council. Having this self-imposed restriction makes this more difficult to achieve. It might be argued that there could be a possible conflict of interest. This can only be extremely rare, and if it did occur, could be easily managed. Given the above, the Council is asked to approve the following amendments to Part 2 of the Constitution. In paragraph 2.2.5, under Planning Committee, delete in brackets NB councillors and substitute members of Licensing Committee cannot be members of Planning Committee, close brackets, and in paragraph 2.2.6, under Licensing Committee, delete in brackets NB councillors and substitute members of Planning Committee cannot be members of Licensing Committee, close brackets. I'd like to move that motion.
Can I ask, is that seconded? Can I ask if that's seconded? Councillor Mackay. Yes. So can it now be debated? So it now can be debated. Councillor Joy.
Thank you. As Chairman of Licensing, and I've not been chair that long, but we've shared that chairmanship with Councillor Hinder, it did come as a bit of a surprise for me when I read it in the papers, because I had no understanding that that was what people were thinking at the time. So a bit disappointed that nobody had contacted me. However, we are where we are. And the other concern I have, and I'm hoping that Councillor Perry will agree with me, I think the two reasons you state there which I agree with you, it's a statutory committee, but you say it's because other boroughs do it, and if they're on planning. I don't think that's the correct reason that Maidstone just follow suits with other boroughs. So what I'm hoping is that perhaps it could be looked at more thoroughly, maybe at democratic services before a decision is made. And I don't know how I go about doing a proposal for that, but that's what I'd like it to go to democratic services so that it can be looked at properly. Democracy.
Democracy.
Yeah, democracy if I have a seconder.
Okay, can I, can
You can do it anyway. It can
Yeah.
be referred to the...
Well, I think I'd prefer it to be referred to committee, because that's why we got the committee, so we can discuss these sort of things. So if everybody's happy with that, could I get a yeah, agree? Thank you very much, everybody. Is that okay?
There's no... People don't want any further debate, just clarify.
No further debate, we just pass it to the committee, yes? Lovely, thank you. So now we're... Item 19. Sorry. I move that with the deletion of the first time of changes as they have happened already, the wishes of the leader of the Conservative group with regard to the membership of committees are set out on the agenda be accepted. Is that second? Ed?
Yeah.
Yes?
Councillor Chapel-Clay.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah. So now, that's all that's left for. I'm sorry I get stern sometimes, but you have to behave, and that's all there is to it. But I do love you, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a really brilliant New Year. So thank you very much, and now the meeting's closed. Yeah, I did say. Now, I did say the meeting was over.
Okay.
I did say that. Go home. Is Russell still in the lift? Oh, this is embarrassing, isn't it? Not for me, for him. Oh, horrible. An hour and a half.
Well, that was... How long ago was that? 20 minutes?
Sorry. Oh dear, I'm sorry. Well, we won't forget this Christmas. No, they're Denise's. She very kindly gave